Chapter 760. No. Meg and Crassus rose to their feet almost in unison, and both of them were appraising Yuri with a dangerous look in their eyes. Yuri immediately felt a chill run down his spine, and reflexively took a couple of steps back. These two looked so terrifying, even more so than Irina. All of the officials also turned to look at Amy, who was in Meg's arms, with contemplative looks on their faces. This little girl was still very young, but with her insane aptitude, she was destined to become one of the most powerful beings on the Norland continent in the future. Furthermore, she was already so adorable and exquisite at this age, and she was definitely going to be a great beauty when she grew up. The third prince didn't appear to be very bright, but it appeared that he was very smart. However, she was a half-elf, after all. The biggest question was whether the king would agree to let the third prince take a half-elf as his wife. Of course, it appeared that Meg and Crassus weren't going to let this go. Meg could be ignored, but Crassus' identity couldn't be ignored. Even though it was said that he had already left the Magus Tower and was going to settle down in Chaos City, he didn't say that he was going to leave the Wrath Empire. If he didn't want to betroth his disciple to the third prince, then even the king would have to carefully consider the pros and cons. Is that not a good thing? This big head dares to set his sights on Amy. He should be chopped up and thrown into the moat to feed the fishes. Meg glowered at Yuri with a cold expression. No one in this world could take Amy away from him. Otherwise, they would all die. Crassus was also glaring at Yuri with a cold expression. How dare you set your sights on my disciple? Do you think you're worthy of my disciple? Is there anyone in this world who's worthy of my disciple? Why are you being so mean? I'm just worried that big sister Irina wants me to marry her daughter, so I'm just trying to find some idiot. This little idiot is a little dumb, but she's still quite pleasing to the eye, Yuri thought to himself as he looked at the menacing Meg and Crassus. Could it be that this brat took what I said back then for real? How does he know that Amy is my daughter? Irina looked at Yuri with a perplexed expression. The hall fell into an eerie silence. Meg, who was carrying Amy, and Crassus, who was holding a magic caster's staff, were facing off against Yuri, who had a panicked expression on his face. Father, does Mushroom Head want me to marry him? Amy asked innocently as she looked up at Meg. Yui's eyes lit up. If the little fool agreed, it would be useless even if the big fool and the scary Grandpa Crassus disagreed. Yes. Meg looked at Amy and nodded with a slightly complicated expression. He was just about to instill in her some thoughts of resisting arranged marriages and puppy love. Amy was already looking at Yuri with a serious expression as she said, I don't think I'm worthy of your big head. Besides, I can open my own umbrella when I go out. Poochie. The hall fell silent for a while before someone finally couldn't help but burst into laughter. My God, this little girl is way too adorable. She has such a venomous mouth, but she's still so adorable. Could it be that His Highness' head is already strong enough to shelter someone from the wind and rain? A joyous atmosphere began to spread throughout the hall, especially at the sight of Amy's serious expression. She was clearly saying such hurtful words, but it made him feel as if he was the one holding her in his arms. This was a very interesting feeling. I. Yuri's mouth also gaped open as he looked at Amy and rubbed his own head. It was indeed a little big, but he still had to open an umbrella when it rained. I didn't think that even a prodigy like me would be rejected. Yuri shook his head in disappointment at the sight of Amy's serious expression. It wasn't that he felt sorry for Amy, but rather that there were still people in this world who couldn't see his talent and only saw his head. Is there anything wrong with having a big head? Is that something I can decide? Yuri sighed. He still felt a little dejected from being rejected. You really are my daughter. Irina nodded in satisfaction. As expected of my daughter. Meg was suddenly very gratified as he patted Amy's head with a smile. As long as Amy didn't agree, then everything would be easy to handle. I'm going to marry Father. Father is the best, Amy whispered into Meg's ear. Little girl. Meg's heart was filled with warmth. She was still young, so she didn't know anything about marriage or love. However, she knew who was the best for her, and she wanted to stay by his side for the rest of her life. This feeling of being trusted and relied on touched the softest part of his heart. In the face of 3 consecutive rejections, everyone turned their attention back to the king. The final outcome of this matter still depended on the king's decision. Meg looked into the king's eyes with a determined expression. "Your Majesty, please forgive me for my rudeness, but my daughter is not even 4 years old yet. She's still at the age where she's just learning how to speak and how to walk, so she's not suitable to talk about marriage." "Yeah. Amy blinked her eyes before singing a line in her baby voice. Crassus also chimed in with a serious expression. "Your Majesty, this disciple of mine has only just started learning magic from me. She won't be able to become a master for at least 8 to 10 years, so she doesn't have the time to play woodcarving with the third prince." The king looked at Meg and Crassus before turning to Yuri. "Yuri, do you really like this little girl?" Yuri crossed his arms in front of his chest with a proud expression. "I don't like her anymore. I only like people who like me, and those who don't like me don't deserve to be liked by me. Unless she also likes me," he added. "How could there be an idiot like that?" Amy asked with a curious expression. Yuri was immediately dejected as he turned to the king in a dejected manner. "Father, I don't want this reward. I'll ask you for it next time when I think of something." A hint of disappointment flashed through the king's eyes, but he still nodded in the end. "All right, in that case, I'll give you anything you want." Josh and Sean both heaved a sigh of relief in unison, and their wariness toward Yuri was also significantly reduced. An idiot was still an idiot, after all. He couldn't even grasp the opportunity presented to him. "Master Crassus, Mr. Meg, please take a seat. Please don't take Yuri's rudeness to heart." The king gestured for Crassus and Meg to take a seat before smiling as he said, "If Mr. Meg is willing, you can open a restaurant in Rhodu. Master Crassus' original magic lab is in the Magus Tower, so he'll be able to teach better." Yuri's offering of a Gundam was quite a shock to everyone. It was even more impactful than Sean's Crimson Flame sword. Following that, the other gifts presented by the various representatives and officials were quite lackluster, and there wasn't anything worth mentioning. After the gifts were presented, the king's birthday celebration came to a successful conclusion. The king, the various representatives, and a few officials went to the side palace to discuss matters, while everyone else began to disperse and prepare to leave the palace. Crassus declined the king's invitation to attend the celebration, and he was preparing to leave the palace with Meg and Amy. Irina took a fleeting glance at Meg as she rose to her feet, and their eyes just so happened to meet. After a brief exchange of glances, they quickly parted ways and left the palace with the various representatives. "Father, will we be able to see big sister Irina again?" Amy asked with a concerned expression as she wrapped her arms around Meg's shoulder. Meg nodded with certainty. "Of course, we'll see her again. What's so difficult about that? If little Amy wants to see her, Master can take you to see her anytime," Crassus interjected. After the king and his entourage left the palace, everyone rose to their feet. Meg had only taken a few steps forward when someone patted him on the shoulder from behind, and excitedly said, "Mr. Mac. Do you still recognize me? So it's Duke Abraham." Meg turned around with a smile at the sight of the smiling Duke Abraham. This idle duke was one of a kind in the Roth Empire. Furthermore, he didn't put on any airs, and was quite approachable, so Meg had a good impression of him. Abraham sighed with emotion as he said, "Looks like Mr. Mac still remembers me. I thought you were the stall owner yesterday, but who would have thought that you'd come to the palace to cook for me today? If I'd known earlier, I would have asked you to cook more dishes so I could try the braised chicken and rice and spicy grilled fish as well." Meg couldn't help but burst into laughter at the sight of Abraham's sulky expression and tone. He nodded, and said, "If you ever come to Chaos City, you can come to Amy's. It's right in the Aden Square. That's my restaurant, and there are many more dishes to order." "Really?" Abraham's eyes immediately lit up. Just that black pepper steak had already left him completely hooked, and judging from Meg's words, he could tell that there were more dishes that he could cook. Abraham thought to himself for a moment before making a decision. "How about this, Mr. Mac? You can come to my manor today, and let me know when you're coming back to Chaos City, and I'll go with you. Is it that urgent?" Meg turned to Abraham with a hint of surprise on his face. He was one of the 10 great dukes of the empire, yet he was willing to follow him to Chaos City just for the sake of good food. It was quite rare to see such a glutton. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he shook his head and said, "Thank you for your invitation, Duke Abraham, but I'm a little tired today, so I'm going back to rest with my daughter. We're going back to Chaos City the day after tomorrow. If you'd like to come with us, you can come with us." "I see. All right, I'll be sure to come with you the day after tomorrow." Abraham nodded with a forlorn expression, but his voice was filled with determination. Thus, Abraham departed, and Meg carried Amy out of the palace. Luna and a white-haired elderly man were already waiting for them at the entrance. "Teacher Luna." Amy spread open her arms with elation, and Luna accepted her with a smile. "Mr. Meg, I am Byron Field, Luna's grandfather." The white-haired elderly man also stepped forward before extending a hand toward Meg. "Greetings, Master Byron." Meg hurriedly reached out to shake Byron's wrinkled hand. His brown eyes were deep and clear, and seemed to be filled with wisdom. The steward who had sent them to the palace earlier came up to them with a smile, and respectfully said, "Congratulations, Master Meg, for winning the Best Dish Award." "Thank you." Meg nodded politely. The steward continued in a respectful manner, "Your belongings have all been packed, and they've been sent back to your manor. Would you like to go out for a walk or go straight back to your manor?" "I'm a little tired, I'll go straight back." Mag looked up at the sky. It was still clear in the morning, but there were already many dark clouds in the sky now. It looked a little gloomy, and it made people feel a little uncomfortable. It seemed that there was going to be a heavy rain today. "All right." The steward nodded, and after Meg and Amy got into the carriage, it drove out of the palace. Mag lifted a corner of the curtain, and looked out at the majestic palace that kept passing by. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. The battle between the two dragons is going to be a good show. I just don't know who will emerge victorious in the end. Should I get involved? Yui. Interesting. Father, what are you smiling about? Amy looked at Meg curiously. "I'm smiling. I have a good baby." Meg retracted his gaze, and looked at Amy with a smile. In the royal palace's conference hall, a long table was placed in the center of the hall. King Andre sat at the head of the table, while Sean and Josh sat on his left and right as usual. The representatives of the various races sat on either side of the long table, and Novan sat at the end. The atmosphere in the silent hall was a little tense. Everyone sat facing each other like that, and no one had the intention to speak first. After a long silence, Andre looked at everyone, and said in a low voice, "Although I invited all of you here in the name of my birthday celebration, the main purpose is to discuss the re-signing of the peace treaty in 3 months' time. Is the treaty from 100 years ago still suitable for the current continent? As for what terms should be deleted or added, I hope all of you can voice out your demands, and then we'll discuss and vote on it." 100 years ago, all of our races signed a peace treaty in order to end the war among species, and the Norland continent has enjoyed relative peace for 100 years. The Elven race is willing to renew the peace treaty. Irina raised a hand, and looked at the orc and demon representatives with a cold expression as she said, "However, I'm warning you, if any other race dares to capture and sell our Elven brethren, it will be seen as a declaration of war against the Elven race. I'll do everything in my power to save them, and then kill those bastards." Gurjil and Sanha's hearts shuddered in unison. As expected, this woman was still the most terrifying woman in the world, but they still had to force themselves to remain calm. "Seeing as she's the hope of the Elven race, then I'll crush all of them today." Gurjil thought to himself as he withdrew his gaze. The dwarf representative turned to Gurjil, and said, "Our dwarven race is also willing to renew the peace treaty. However, before that, we strongly request that the demon race return all of the territory that they've forcibly occupied over the past few years to us, and also add additional terms to the treaty to punish those who forcibly occupy other races' territory. The goblin race has no objections. If everyone is willing to sign, then we'll sign. If no one is willing to sign, then we won't sign either." A sinister smile appeared on the dark green goblin representative's face, revealing a mouthful of sharp fangs. Bruno wore a nonchalant expression as he said, "Our giant dragon race is also willing to sign, but we can't afford to lose any of our territory. I'm unable to learn such non-scientific things, so I can't make those wooden dolls that the big-headed prince made. You're a system created by the heavenly Tao, but you can't even compare to a big-headed prince. Meg was a little disdainful. Me. Who says the system can't compare to him? That's just a one-time use toy made from wood. Every time I replace a crystal, I can only throw 2 punches. It's expensive to make, but it doesn't have much practical effect. The system disdains making things like that. The system's voice was tinged with disdain. You make it sound like you can make something better. Meg was also disdainful. Isn't that to be expected? Micronucleus power coupled with phase transfer armor and a railgun. If you encounter a wooden doll like that, you only need 1 shot to take care of it. The system was extremely unconvinced. Holy shit. System, you can really make this thing? Meg's eyes suddenly lit up. Wasn't this the fucking standard of a Gundam? This isn't for sale, so don't even think about it. Just focus on making your cake. You're the man who's going to become the god of cookery, so do your best. The system said leisurely before its voice disappeared. Father, is the ice cream cake delicious? Amy interrupted Meg's thoughts. This chef from Chaos City had actually ascended to the throne that all of the chefs in the Roth Empire wanted to attain, and they were still doubting his culinary skills prior to this. On this day, the name Meg spread throughout the world of chefs. Even though he still wasn't the #1 chef in the world, he was already beginning to make a name for himself. Everyone knew that an incredible chef had appeared in Chaos City, and even the king of the Roth Empire was full of praise for him. Meg was still quite concerned about these false accolades. After all, the main objective of the system was to portray him as the god of cookery. Then, all of the chefs would come looking for him to punish him. Meg had already seen through this little trick, but he just didn't want to expose it. What he had to do was very simple. As he continued to improve his culinary skills, he also had to raise the stakes for duels with him so that most chefs wouldn't dare to challenge him. At the same time, he had to make all of the chefs who thought that they were capable of challenging him to a duel would have to consider the price that they would have to pay. Meg was confident that very few chefs on the Norland continent would be willing to challenge him to a duel soon. When that time came, he would have completed all of the main missions given by the system and reached the pinnacle of his life. System, give me the ingredients I need to make an ice cream cake, Meg said internally. The system has already stated that it won't provide you with any ingredients for this trip to Rodu. If you need any ingredients, you have to find them on the spot. The system's serious voice sounded. System, I've already completed the mission for this trip to Rodu. The restrictions you mentioned earlier are within the scope of the mission, and the ingredients I need are for myself. Is there any connection between the two? Meg pursed his lips with a question of his own. Well. The system hesitated. I earned 1,000 dragon coins today, but I don't know how to spend them. There seems to be a lot of good stuff to buy in Rodu. How about? Meg was a little conflicted. Ding. The ingredients you need have been prepared and have been sent to the first level of the cabinet. If there's anything you need, please feel free to let me know. The system will provide you with the best service. The system's gentle voice sounded, and an image of a smiling stewardess appeared in Rodu's mind. Do you think your voice is worthy of this image? Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes. He opened the cabinet to find that all types of ingredients were indeed available. As he loaded the ingredients into the ice cream cake machine, he asked internally, System, can you make Gundam? If you're talking about a jigsaw toy, then of course I can make one. I'm talking about a real Gundam. I don't ask for much, just like the one that the big-headed prince made. Can you do it? The system knows nothing about magic. I can't learn anything that's not scientific, so I can't make the wooden figurines that the big-headed prince made. You're a system created by the heavenly Tao, and you can't even compare to a big-headed prince. Meg was a little disdainful. Me. Who says the system can't compare to him? That's just a one-time use toy made from wood. Every time I replace a crystal, I can only throw 2 punches. It's expensive to make, but it doesn't have much practical effect. The system disdains making things like that. The system's voice was tinged with disdain. You make it sound like you can make something better. Meg was also disdainful. Isn't that to be expected? Micronucleus power coupled with phase transfer armor and a railgun. If you encounter a wooden figurine like that, you only need one shot to take care of it. The system was extremely unconvinced. Holy shit. System, you can really make this thing? Meg's eyes suddenly lit up. Wasn't this a fucking standard for a Gundam? This is not for sale. Don't even think about it. Just focus on making your cake. You're the man who's going to become the god of cookery. Good luck. The system said leisurely, and then its voice disappeared. Father, is the ice cream cake delicious? Amy interrupted Meg's thoughts. Tomorrow morning, news of the elven princess's tragic death on the streets of Rodu will spread across the entire continent, and the ones who killed her were a bunch of black-robed men of unknown origins. That's right, it's enough as long as they're human. The group of black-clothed men also laughed out loud, as if they had heard something funny. Their eyes flickered with light in the darkness. Irina glanced at the black-clothed people standing in the front row and frowned. Demons, orcs, trolls, you're really in cahoots. It seems like you're ready to start a second racial war. Gurjil stretched his neck as a cold smile appeared on his face. The Norland continent's tradition is that the weak humans and elves have no right to occupy such a vast territory. You should just play the role of food and toys. That's the way things should be. That's right. After all, powerful races like you have to gather 12 of them before you dare to find trouble with a weak elf like me. Irina nodded with a mocking smile. Alex was just as stubborn as you were back in the day. However, we're not going to let you live this time. Gurjil's voice was tinged with rage. Irina's expression darkened slightly upon hearing this, and she asked in a grim voice, who else was involved in that incident aside from you? Perhaps you'll never imagine that the mastermind behind that incident wasn't us. Instead, it was our favorite prince, His Highness. However, what he wanted to do was exactly the same as what we wanted to do, so we willingly sacrificed ourselves for him and got rid of Alex. Gurjil's voice was tinged with excitement, and even his hand was trembling slightly. So it really was him. Irina wasn't all that surprised, but at the very least, this confirmed her suspicions. Thinking back to the letters that Josh had written to her regarding the search for Meg and Amy, the disgust in her heart intensified. Of course, Josh will also be blamed for what happened today, and will announce it to the world along with what happened 3 years ago. His reputation will be completely destroyed, and the alliance between humans and elves will cease to exist. It's a pity that you won't get the chance to witness a true golden age. Slaughter is such a fun thing to do. The Norland continent has been silent for over 100 years, and it's time for a reshuffle. Weak races should prostrate themselves on the ground while we stand at the top of the entire continent. Gurjil's voice was filled with madness, and his red eyes were like 2 balls of flames in the darkness. Looks like Josh has also fallen out with you too. A contemplative look appeared on Irina's face. Humans have always been so short-sighted. They'll do anything to achieve their goals, but they'll never consider their own race, Gurjil said with a smile. Looks like you're working with someone else this time. Irina's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she had already figured out something. You don't need to know that. I'm worried that I'm going to die from talking too much to you, so you can go and die. Gurjil raised his left hand before swiping it downward. The rainwater was sliced in half, and several tens of sharp arrows hurtled toward them from the distance. The sharp arrowheads were covered in green venom. An orc rushed toward them in large strides, and his body abruptly grew taller. His bulging muscles threatened to burst open his loose black robe, and he raised a massive iron staff that was as thick as an arm above his head before bringing it crashing down toward Irina. Countless vines suddenly erupted from the ground before binding around Irina's legs and body. Some of them transformed into poisonous tongues and sharp spikes that hurtled toward Irina in a frenzy. Ding! A notification sounded from the freezer, and Meg and Amy's eyes lit up in unison. Father, it's done. The ice cream cake is done. Amy, who had a speck of white cream on her nose, clapped her little hands in elation. This was the dish she had been waiting for the longest time, but she was confident that it would be an extremely delicious dish. All right, let me take out the strawberry ice cream cake, Meg said with a smile as he pulled open the freezer's door. Ding. Important notification. Would you like to purchase emergency information for a fee? Right at this moment, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. System, have you gone crazy from thinking about money? You're even selling emergency information? Meg pursed his lips in disdain. Amy was right in front of him, so what emergency information could she possibly have? The elven princess is in danger. Death rate, 100%. Chapter 766. What? Meg's hands trembled, and he almost dropped the cake in his hand. Princess Irina is in grave danger. This information is priced at 10 dragon coins. If the host feels, deduct it yourself. Where is she now? What happened? Mag cut off the system's words with a tense and serious expression. 10 dragon coins have been deducted. Princess Irina is currently located on the 5th Street, and she's currently under attack. Based on the strength of both sides, the probability of her death is 100%. The system's elated voice sounded. The 5th Street. Meg's heart jolted upon hearing this. He was naturally no stranger to this place. On that rainy night 3 years ago, Alex had been surrounded and killed there. The memory of that night flashed through his mind. And now, Irina was also being attacked on the 2nd Street. Was the incident from 3 years ago going to repeat itself? Meg's heart began to race. It smells so good. There's a cake wrapped in ice cream, and there are cute little strawberries on top. It looks so delicious. Amy looked at the ice cream cake in Meg's hand with elation on her face. Meg placed the cake on the table before turning to Amy with a serious expression. Amy, I have something very important to attend to, but I can't let anyone know about it. Stay here and eat your cake, then use magic to conjure up another father like last time. He'll stay here and eat the cake with you, alright? Amy looked at the anxious Meg. This was the first time she had seen such an expression on her father's face. Even though she didn't know what it was, she knew that it had to be something very important. She nodded obediently, and said, alright, go ahead, father. Amy will stay here and wait for you to come back. He waved his wand, and a Meg appeared beside Meg. Even the clothes he was wearing were identical, and there was a smile on his face. Good girl. Meg glanced at the Meg that was created by magic. If he didn't enter the room, he would be able to pass off as the real Meg. He reached out his hand and closed the window halfway. Then, he opened the door and looked around. After that, he dashed out of the room and nimbly flipped over the courtyard wall. After jumping over several high walls, he successfully left the second prince's residence. Heavy rain poured down, hitting his face painfully. Not a single pedestrian could be seen on the pitch-black street. System, I want to use that opportunity. Meg wiped the water off his face and ran in a certain direction. At the same time, he said calmly in his heart. Host, there is only one chance to return to your peak state. This may be your only chance to save your life. Are you sure you want to use it now? The system asked seriously. If one day, Amy finds out that I had a chance to save her mother, but gave it up because I wanted to save my own life, she'll definitely hate me. A gentle smile appeared on Meg's face as he said, I told her that I was going to bring her mother back. Why would I lie to her? It's not like it's you. The system was silent for a moment before issuing a stern warning. Host, please prepare yourself. You will need 3 seconds to return to your peak state, and the duration will be 10 minutes. Please make sure to return to a safe location before the onset of your feeble state. 3 seconds. Meg was a little surprised by the system's efficiency. However, before Meg had a chance to think any further, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky and struck Meg's body with a resounding boom. That's right, it was a bolt of lightning. Meg had never seen a bolt of lightning of different colors that could be twisted into a single bolt of lightning before crashing down from the sky with such unerring accuracy. Boom. Meg felt as if a bomb had exploded right next to his ear, leaving only a buzzing sound in his ears. Following that, a numbing sensation quickly spread throughout his body. His muscles felt as if they had been forcibly torn apart before being reconstructed amidst the lightning. This process was obviously much more painful than the previous 2 electric shocks. It was even more terrifying than the blood exchange. It was as if all the cells in his body had been reconstructed. This excruciating feeling almost made Meg faint. Ding! Physical peak state has been successfully activated. The 10-minute countdown begins. When the system's voice rang out, Meg felt as if a century had passed. The numbing sensation and pain all over his body disappeared at the same time, causing him to grin a little uncomfortably. It's over. Meg was stunned for a moment. He looked down at his clothes that had completely disappeared from his body and hurriedly covered his private parts with his hands. The torrential rain washed away the black ash left behind by the lightning strike. Meg finally felt the powerful feedback from his body. It was as if there was an endless amount of power wreaking havoc in his body. In front of this power, a 5th-tier strength was as fragile as a baby. So this is the power of a 10th-tier knight at the pinnacle. Meg clenched his fists. He felt as if he could shatter a city wall with a single punch. This was a power that couldn't be explained by science. System, give me a black robe and a mask. I'll put them on. Meg stood with his back against the wall. He really didn't have the courage to run around naked on the streets of Rodu. The black robe has been delivered. The system can provide over 1,000 masks for the host to choose from. Among them, Meg put on a black robe, and a series of strange masks appeared in his mind at the same time. I'll take the third black one. Meg only took a quick glance at it before coming to a decision. Ding! The mask has been delivered. 15 dragon coins have been deducted. Meg pulled the mask from the back of his head to the front, and it fit his face very well. He rushed forward like an arrow and instantly appeared over 100 meters away. Only then did he hear the sound of something hurtling through the air behind him. Hang in there, Irina. You won't be alone this time. Meg didn't stop in the slightest as he rushed toward the 5th Street in the northern part of the city like a ghost. System, do you work in logistics? The system is a gourmet system. Logistics is 100 dragon coins. Logistics is naturally part of the system's job. If the host has left something at home and needs help, the system is more than happy to oblige. It can be delivered within 5 minutes within the Norland continent. The system's voice was filled with a hint of flattery. Give me Alex's sword, Meg said calmly. Host. Logistics is the delivery of goods. The goods must belong to the host. Only then can the system deliver them. However, you're asking the system to steal them. That's against the system's principles and beyond the scope of our services, the system said in a serious voice. System, who's the owner of that sword? Meg Alex. Then who am I? Shin Meg Alex, seeing as that sword belongs to me, is it still within the logic of logistics for me to ask you to give me something that belongs to me? Meg asked before adding, do it or leave it. I'll do it. The system was silent for a moment before replying in a feeble voice. Your Highness, our scouts have reported that Princess Irina seems to have been attacked on the 2nd Street. She knew that she wouldn't be able to break through this barrier in a short period of time. At the very least, before the attacks that of the beastman's attacks were, she would be unable to do so. However, he should be able to take good care of her. After all, the food he cooks is so delicious. A smile appeared on Irina's face again. There was probably nothing that made her happier than meeting him again and seeing Amy grow up. Even though it was a little regrettable, she was still going to drag these guys down with her. Irina raised the staff in her hand and chanted in a loud voice, Holy light, heed my call and purify the filth of this world. Holy light lit up again, and a beam of holy light as thick as an arm shot forward. A mangled crimson figure was forced out of the darkness and exposed to the holy light. Ah! A blood-curdling cry rang out alongside the sizzling sound of corrosion. The blood patriarch that had been summoned was unable to escape from the holy light. It was as if a chain of light had bound him, and no matter how much he struggled, his flesh and blood were being corroded at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye. Ah! No. At the same time, the body of the vampire that had summoned the blood patriarch also began to fester, and he knelt to the ground as he screamed and struggled. Bam! At the same time that Irina released her holy light, Gurjil also appeared before her and swept his 2-meter-long saber toward Irina in an attempt to slice her in half. Irina raised her staff in front of her, but she was still sent flying by the saber before crashing into the dilapidated memorial arch 5 or 6 meters away. Many fine cracks appeared on the boulder behind her, and Irina's face paled as blood trickled down from the corners of her lips. At the same time, the half-ape orc descended from the sky with his staff in hand, crashing down toward Irina. A spell formation lit up beneath Irina's feet, and golden light flashed as she appeared around 10 meters away. Boom! The ruins of the memorial archway turned into a pile of sand and stone. Where the stick landed, there was a huge pit that was several meters deep. Irina stumbled slightly as a stone pillar that was as thick as a water bucket came crashing down toward her again. The 5-meter-tall troll was like a gargantuan Buddha with a pair of grayish-white eyes on its mossy face. A teleportation spell formation lit up beneath Irina's feet again, and she disappeared in the instant before the stone pillar crashed into the ground. The stone pillar crashed to the ground with a resounding boom, causing the remaining buildings to collapse like a clap of thunder on a rainy night. Golden light flashed again, and Irina appeared above the troll's head. She held her staff with both hands and brought it down viciously upon the troll's head. Bam! A massive crater appeared in the troll's head, and a series of cracks began to spread downward from its head. Chapter 769. Ding! A black claymore flew through the air, slicing through all of the vines that had wrapped around the magic barrier before nailing itself firmly to the ground. Tian! Tian Du! Gurjil stared at the black claymore and that deep voice, and the horror that had been lurking deep within his heart surged forth like a tidal wave. Madness took hold of his heart, and the hand that was holding his saber began to tremble uncontrollably. Ah! The forest troll immediately withdrew all of its vines and let loose a howl of anguish as it turned toward the street with horror in its eyes. The orc also wore a horrified expression as he shook his head and took a couple of steps backward. No! Impossible! He died 3 years ago. There's no way he's still alive. Meg Alex was a name that had once resounded throughout the entire Norland continent, and it was almost synonymous with invincibility. The most powerful orc warriors had been slain by his sword, and even the most ferocious demons could only submit to him with their tails between their legs. Even giant dragons that soared through the heavens had been slain by his sword. This was a name that struck fear into the hearts of all powerful beings in the Norland continent, and it was like a sharp sword that was hanging over their heads. Thankfully, he had died 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they had witnessed his fall on the 5th Street with their very own eyes. As participants in the battle, they knew that Alex had half of his bones broken, all of his tendons severed, and he had been cursed by magic. Even if he didn't die, he would be a cripple for the rest of his life. However, he had appeared again. Tian Du, the sword that only Alex could wield, had reappeared, and it seemed to be heralding the return of that man. The boundless horror they were experiencing was even more chilling than the autumn rain. That night, a dozen or so 10th-tier powerful beings had surrounded him, but he had killed half of them. It was truly a stroke of luck that they had managed to survive. The gruesome scenes of that night were still vivid in their minds. Even though they had made the most thorough preparations and gathered a dozen or so 10th-tier powerful beings, they had still only been able to defeat him after paying a heavy price. Thinking back to the events that had transpired, Gurjil felt that if it hadn't been for the half-elf infant, all of them would have most likely died there. Irina looked at the sword, and her hand that was holding the small black ball slowly loosened. Apart from being pleasantly surprised, she was also a little more scrutinizing. She muttered to herself, I haven't seen him for 3 years, and he even knows how to say such things. Looks like I have to properly investigate who he has met during these 3 years. Furthermore, has his strength recovered? Kill her first. Then we'll kill Alex together. It's impossible for him to regain his peak strength. Gurjil did his best to calm himself down as he roared, and he swung his trembling saber toward Irina again. The orc and troll also calmed down. The troll let out a roar, and countless branches turned into glowing spears. The orc's fur suddenly turned bright red, and he madly rushed towards Irina. Even if Alex hadn't died, There was no way that he could have recovered to the peak of his powers. As long as Irina died, the three of them would still have a chance to kill him. Right at this moment, a black figure appeared on the street over 100 meters away. In the next instant, a hand grabbed onto the Tian-Du sword that was standing in front of Irina, and a black-robed man had already positioned himself in front of Irina. Only then did the sound of air being torn apart rang out. "Looks like you have a death wish." Meg glanced at Gajeel before swinging his heavy sword through the air. The 2-meter-long saber that was burning with scorching red flames stained the entire sky red, and it seemed to hold the absolute advantage in the face of the inky black heavy sword. However, the inky black heavy sword was extremely fast, and even though it wasn't all that sharp, it was still able to slice through the space around it. The saber and the sword clashed, and a crisp sound akin to that of metal striking stone rang out. Contrary to Gajeel's expectations, the red saber was snapped in half, and a half-meter-long section of it flew through the air before nailing itself onto a wall over 100 meters away. Meanwhile, the remaining half of the saber in Gajeel's hand was shattered into countless pieces, and countless cracks appeared on its surface before it fell to the ground. Meg turned to the side and swung his heavy sword through the air. All of the spear-like tree branches that were hurtling toward him were instantly reduced to sawdust, and not a single one of them was able to break through his defenses. "Die, Alex!" The orc that had transformed into a giant red ape let loose an enraged roar, and he leaped high into the air before swinging his staff down toward Alex. Aside from the fact that orcs had dark green skin, the biggest difference between orcs and humans was that orcs could enter a berserk state and even transform into ferocious beasts for a short period of time. The reason why the orcs were able to dominate the Norland continent was because of their immense strength. They didn't need any techniques, and their strength would increase by hundreds or even thousands of times as they progressed. After that, they would be able to crush their opponents into mincemeat with unstoppable force. Their direct and unyielding battle style was rather similar to orcs' personalities. Cade was the Great Elder of the Red Ape tribe, and he was one of the 10 Great Elders of the orc race. Even though he was ranked at the bottom, his combat prowess was still extremely powerful. 3 years ago, he hadn't witnessed Alex's power in person, and had only heard about him from legends. However, on that night, he had witnessed one 10th-tier powerhouse after another being slain by that man. This man, who had been declared to be permanently crippled and had died in a fire, had appeared again. However, he had no choice. Today's mission would determine the future of the entire Red Ape tribe. If he were to die here today, the Red Ape tribe would still remain one of the 10 great tribes for the next 500 years. As such, he could die, but he didn't want to. Cade's black staff was as thick as an arm, leaving a trail of after-images in its wake. It appeared to be an ordinary staff, but even the air itself seemed to have caved in, creating a series of inky black rifts. There weren't many 10th-tier powerhouses on the Norland continent. If a tribe had a dozen 10th-tier powerhouses, then it could be considered a powerful tribe. Among them, most of them were 5th-tier giant dragons. As such, giant dragons ruled over Dragon Islands and looked down upon all other tribes. Even the elven race had less than 10 10th-tier magic casters. As for the weakest goblins and dwarfs, who focused on forging and construction, they had less than 5 10th-tier powerhouses. 10th-tier powerhouses were widely acknowledged as the pinnacle of power on the Norland continent. This staff strike was Cade's most powerful one, and it was the highest level of berserk state. He had abandoned all flashy techniques, and was only left with the purest explosive power. This staff strike seemed to be able to crush the heavens. "Piss off." Meg looked up at Cade before swinging the black heavy sword in his hand through the air. It was also a simple sword strike. There was no sharp tip of the sword, nor was there a sharp blade. Instead, the body of the sword was engraved with ancient patterns, and it flew through the air horizontally. The thick and sturdy staff was bent at a strange angle, and sparks flew in all directions as it was unable to withstand the immense force of the strike. The broad and flat blade of the sword struck Cade's chest without slowing down in the slightest, and his furry chest caved in with a resounding thump. A dull thump rang out, as if the sword had struck leather. The blood-curdling cries came to an abrupt halt. Chapter 770. The royal palace in the storm was like a giant beast lurking in the dark. Lights flickered in the storm and strong winds, and the female servants were struggling to walk along the walls of the corridor, trying their best to maintain the normal operation of the royal palace where the highest authority of the Roth Empire resided. At this moment, on the top floor of the tallest hall in the depths of the palace, a figure was standing by the window, looking toward the north of the city. The oil lamp with a windproof lampshade swayed slightly, reflecting the king's majestic face and the dark shadow behind him. Alex has appeared. Judging from the energy waves, he's probably not any weaker than when he was at his peak. The figure behind him that was completely hidden in the darkness spoke. His hoarse voice couldn't hide his surprise. Andrei's expression darkened slightly. He frowned and said, "He really didn't die, but how did he recover? You said that even if he didn't die, he would only be a cripple for the rest of his life." The black shadow was silent for a while. "Do you need me to go and take a look?" "No need. If those fools don't have any backup plans, they'll have to swallow the fact that 6 10th-tier powerhouses died in Rodu. How delightful would that be?" Andrei shook his head slightly. The black shadow pondered, and said, "But Sean is also involved in this matter. If Alex is indeed still alive and has recovered to his peak state, Josh might also be in trouble." The corners of Andrei's mouth curled up as he sneered. They brought this trouble upon themselves. In order to inherit the throne, the two of them have done a lot of things behind my back. Although I have seen it all, it's not time for me to die yet. When necessary, I should give them a warning and let them know who is the true master of the empire. I've been the king for so many years, and let the Roth Empire grow steadily. I'm not paving the way for them. Only I have the right to walk this path. If Alex isn't dead, then let him live. He's a human, after all, isn't he? The rain seemed to have become heavier, and shrouded the palace like a curtain of water. That black shadow didn't reply, and Andrei didn't say anything else. He held the railing with both hands, and his deep eyes were still looking toward the north of the city, as if he was waiting for something. The wind forest, the tree of life, which had always been calm and peaceful, suddenly erupted with green light. Green light rose from the hole in the tree, and then condensed into a beam of light that streaked across the sky and flew toward the west. The elves all walked out of the tree holes and houses, and looked up with shock and bewilderment. Irina. In a quiet tree hole, the elven queen opened her eyes, revealing a trace of concern and nervousness. In the blink of an eye, she appeared on the top of the tree. Looking at the wisps of green light rising from the tree of life, her expression was somewhat solemn. How could this be? In the starry sky cave, Helena, elven, Illy the sky, Helena's in the sky. Every star in the starry sky represented an elf. The brightest star was the elven queen, and the star that represented Irina was the second brightest star in the starry sky. But now, the originally dazzling star had become very dim, as if it would be annihilated at any time. Helena turned toward the tree of life, and her brows furrowed even more tightly. Something like this had only happened 3 years ago. At that time, Irina had returned to the wind forest, and suffered from severe bleeding during labor. She had almost lost her life, and only managed to survive under the protection of the tree of life. She had rested for a full 3 years before emerging from the mountain cave. Now, Irina was tens of thousands of kilometers away in Rodu, and the tree of life was acting strangely. Something had most likely happened to her, and she was in an extremely perilous situation. Irina, that damned woman, is finally going to die. An ecstatic expression appeared on Heidi's face at the sight of the flickering star. Helena looked down at the hunchbacked Heidi, and a dangerous light flashed through her eyes as she asked in a cold voice, "What did you do?" Heidi felt as if her entire body had been sealed in ice. Her legs gave out from under her, and she fell to her knees involuntarily. She was a little horrified and deranged as she said, "Mistress, I only delivered a letter to her. That bitch is far too detestable. She has no respect for you, and she even killed Master Houston. She deserves to die." Helena extended a hand toward Heidi, and Heidi's neck seemed to have been gripped by a giant invisible hand. She was slowly lifted into the air until she was at the same height as the platform. She looked at her with a cold expression as she asked, "You colluded with a foreign race to kill Irina?" Heidi's face had turned deathly pale, but she was still staring at Helena with a deranged expression as she said, "Mistress, I did all of this for you. If Irina dies, you can make whoever you want the princess. When that time comes, the entire elven race will kneel at your feet. Now, she's going to die. Shut up." A loud slap rang out within the cave, and Heidi's head was almost sent flying. She twisted her neck with a look of bewilderment and horror on her face. Helena's face was filled with rage as she yelled, "Do you know what Irina represents? She's the hope of the elven race for the next 1,000 years. No elf can replace her, and no elf can compare to her. How dare you collude with a foreign race to kill her? Do you want to become a sinner of the entire elven race?" Heidi's face was extremely pale, and she felt as if she were about to pass out from asphyxiation. However, what made her feel even more despair wasn't death. Chapter 771. Meg had used his flying sword to protect the beauty in front of him, slicing through the saber with a single strike, slicing through the tree spear with a single strike, and sending Cade flying with a single strike. In a battle between powerful beings, time seemed to have lengthened, but in reality, all of this had only taken place in the blink of an eye. Cade crashed to the ground over 10 meters away, and his chest had caved in as if it had been struck by a sledgehammer. He lay sprawled on the ground with blood gushing out of his mouth, and his aura was gradually fading away. The forest troll withdrew its tree branch, and its entire body was stained with green blood. Even one of its arms had been severed, and it was howling in agony. Gurgiel released his grip on the hilt of his saber and hurtled back in retreat, trying to get as far away from Meg as possible. He was Alex. His sword was the Tiandu sword, and Alex was the only person in this world who could wield a heavy sword in such an intricate and unpredictable manner. He had seen that sword technique countless times in his nightmares. 5 years ago, when he had first met Alex, he had surrendered after taking a single sword strike. The last time he had seen him was 3 years ago, and he had almost been killed by Alex's sword strike. On this occasion, he was still unable to take a single sword strike from Alex. "Why are you still alive? Why can you still return to your peak condition? This is impossible. Impossible. Are you a demon?" Gurgiel retreated with a horrified expression, and his mental state was already on the brink of collapse. They had made all the necessary preparations to kill Irina, and all of the 10th-tier powerful beings in Rodu were being monitored. However, no one had thought that Alex would appear, let alone Alex in his peak condition. "I'm in a hurry." Meg glanced at the countdown timer, which was already halfway over, and spoke in a cold voice. He took a step forward and instantly brushed past Gurgiel as he slashed his sword through the air, leaving a thin white line in its wake. Golden flames erupted from Gurgiel's eyes, and his black shield had already appeared in his hand. He raised his hand to shield himself, but his porcupine-like body swelled drastically again, and a layer of hardened black skin had even appeared over his body. The thin white line continued to extend, cutting through the drops of rain. Like a paintbrush, it gently brushed past the black shield and then across his neck. A clean cut appeared on the shield that had been refined from the shell of a 9th-grade magic beast. Half of the turtle shell slowly fell to the ground, and a thin line of blood appeared on Gurgiel's neck. His massive head flew high into the air, and blood gushed forth like a fountain. The rigid headless corpse slowly fell to the ground, and the massive head rolled a few times on the ground, staining the ground red with blood. Just as Joshua was fantasizing about saving Irina and emerging from a pool of blood with her in his arms like a hero, a massive white falcon quickly caught up to him, and a white-haired magic caster on the falcon's back spoke with a grave expression. "What?" Joshua's heart jolted upon hearing that, and even his griffin slowed down significantly as he looked toward the 5th Street with a bewildered expression. If this was a normal 10th-tier opponent, this great magic caster who was protecting him should be able to take care of him. In Rodu, they wouldn't dare to do anything to him, the second prince. However, if this was a patriarch of the spatial demon race, then he would most likely be far more powerful than a normal 10th-tier demon. This great magic caster from the Magus Tower most likely wouldn't be able to defeat him. There's a contract between all races that prohibits patriarch-level beings from appearing in the territories of other races. How dare he violate the contract in public? Is he not afraid that the Wrath Empire will come after him? Joshua clenched his fists tightly. The magic caster wore a concerned expression as he said, "Your Highness, the demons most likely won't give up until they achieve their goal this time. The patriarch of the spatial demon race has appeared in Rodu, and is attacking the elven princess, so that's a direct confrontation with the elven race and the human race. If you go there now, perhaps he'll take the risk and attack you. Please reconsider your decision, Your Highness." Joshua looked in the direction of the 5th Street with a hesitant look on his face. Worry filled his eyes, but the griffin beneath him immediately slowed down. Chapter 772. There was a precipitous grayish-white stone mountain around 5 kilometers west of Rodu. This area was rich in stone, and it was said that the city of Rodu had been built from the stones dug up here to construct its tall city walls. There was also a legend surrounding this lone stone mountain. It was said that when the craftsmen dug up this mountain, the stone suddenly became extremely hard, and even the most resolute iron tools were unable to budge this mountain. This incident alerted the king of the Wrath Empire, and he issued a special order to preserve this mountain, which was why it was known as the Amnesty Mountain. Due to the fact that the mountain was completely bare, and there were no beasts in the surrounding area, even birds were quite rare on this mountain, let alone magic beasts. There was an inky black cave near the summit of the mountain. The entrance of the cave was slightly slanted, so it was almost impossible to see the entrance from the foot of the mountain. Of course, there wasn't even a single blade of grass growing in a place like this, so no one would risk their lives to climb it. The torrential rain was washing away at the grayish-white mountain rocks, but even the craftsmen couldn't do anything about them, so they naturally wouldn't be washed away by the rain. The only sound that could be heard was the pitter-patter of raindrops falling onto the stone walls, and not even the cries of birds or beasts could be heard. Right at this moment, 2 streaks of purple light suddenly lit up within the inky black cave, illuminating the outside of the cave like 2 bolts of lightning. A bolt of lightning flashed past, illuminating half of the sky and illuminating the inky black cave. A gargantuan creature slowly rose to its feet, and it flapped its retracted wings slightly, sending dirt and gravel tumbling all over the ground. The gargantuan creature slowly made its way toward the entrance of the cave, and the 2 streaks of purple light also became brighter and brighter, as if they were 2 lamps. The black figure stood at the entrance of the cave, and it cast its gaze toward Rodu as it let loose a low roar. Another bolt of lightning flashed past. On this occasion, the gargantuan creature standing at the entrance of the cave finally revealed its true form. It was a massive griffin. Its body was covered in dust, and it looked as if it had just rolled through mud. It was very difficult to imagine how such a gargantuan creature with a wingspan of over 10 meters had been able to fit into such a cramped cave. Even so, it was still giving off an intimidating aura as it stood at the entrance of the cave with its wings curled up. Awoo! The lion condor suddenly raised its head and let out a resonant roar. Purple light burst out from its eyes like 2 bright stars, especially dazzling. The griffin's curled wings spread open with a snap, accompanied by the crisp sound of bones cracking. But now, this man had appeared again and was even able to fight against the Void Ancestor. This fear caused his body to tremble uncontrollably. Josh's expression gradually calmed down, and he shook his head as he looked in the direction of the 5th Street. No, I'm going to watch him die tonight. If he doesn't die, then all of us will. The Void Ancestor's chubby face was filled with wrinkles, and his hideous smile had all twisted together like a pile of rotten meat. His eyes were glowing with red light as he looked at the countless octopus tentacles hurtling toward Meg and Irina. It was as if he could already see Irina being ravaged by the tentacles while Alex could only look on in agony. His favorite son had tamed the eye beast when he was just 500 years old, and he possessed exceptional aptitude. However, Alex had killed the eye beast 5 years ago, crippling his demonic spirit and forcing him to commit suicide by entering the spatial turbulence. He had always engraved this grudge in his heart. 3 years ago, Alex had been crippled, and news of his suicide had spread. Everything had gone according to his plan, and he had thought that everything had come to an end. However, who would have thought that Alex would still be alive and return to his peak? My son is dead, so why are you still alive? You should all be buried with him. The Void Ancestor wore a deranged expression as one octopus tentacle after another surged toward Meg, as if it were trying to completely bury them. Meg stood in front of Irina with his long sword drawn and a grim expression on his face. 3 years ago, Alex had been carrying Amy on his back, and he had been crippled. However, on this occasion, Irina was standing behind him, and there were only 230 seconds left before he would be completely exhausted. There was no second chance, and he definitely couldn't allow Amy to lose both her father and mother in one night, so he was prepared to fight with his life on the line. Howl! Right at this moment, a loud roar suddenly rang out in the distance, and a purple figure appeared in the air like a wraith-like spirit before hurtling down like a sharp arrow. Arzi! Meg faltered slightly upon seeing this, and his pupils contracted slightly at the sight of the gargantuan creature hurtling toward them like a bolt of purple lightning. It was a purple griffin. As for the purple lines that glowed under the lightning, he was even more certain that this was Alex's mount, the purple-striped griffin, and its name was Arzi. The Void Ancestor faltered slightly upon hearing this roar, and the fury in his eyes burned even brighter at the sight of the purple-striped griffin. A ball of green flames appeared in his right hand, and he slapped it into the eye-beast's head as a cold smile appeared on his face. Little purple bird, seeing as you still dare to show yourself, I'll make sure you die with me this time. Roar. The eye-beast immediately let loose a thunderous roar, and red and green intertwined all over its body. A hint of green appeared in its deathly white eyes, and its rapidly growing tentacles became twice as thick as before as they hurtled toward Meg like a mass of red meat. The purple griffin landed in front of Meg, and almost at the exact same moment, countless tentacles crashed into the ground where Meg and the others were standing. The ground caved in by 1/2 meter, and the entangling tentacles were like mountains of flesh. Meg and the others were nowhere to be seen. The entire battlefield suddenly fell silent, and the only sound that could be heard was the sound of the torrential rain and the squirming tentacles. Everything seemed to have come to an end. Heh, so weak. The spatial demon patriarch looked down at the mountain of flesh before pursing his lips with disdain. No one had ever been able to escape from the eye-beast's control, and they were going to be tamed and reduced to lowly slaves. Boom. The black shadow behind him moved slightly, but didn't say anything, as if it were waiting for Andre's command. They've challenged my bottom line over and over again. The longer these old bastards live, the more they don't know how to cherish their own lives. Andre withdrew his hand from the railing, and clasped it behind his back as he said in a cold voice, "Then don't let him go back." Yes. The black shadow swayed before disappearing without a trace. Alex, I hope you won't disappoint me this time. If you can be a good boy, you'll have a place in the Roth Empire. The purple-striped griffin continued onward with unstoppable force. The violent tentacles were unable to impede it in the slightest, and the spatial rifts were also easily evaded by the purple-striped griffin. The perfect synergy between the sword, man, and griffin was like a single entity, and there was no need for any communication between them. Almost in the blink of an eye, the griffin had already reached the eye-beast's massive body. There were countless eyeballs all over its body, and there wasn't even a single inch of space to be found. Even with Meg's mental fortitude, he was still feeling rather uncomfortable being stared at by so many dead fish eyes at such a close distance. The severed tentacles squirmed violently before regenerating at a rate discernible to the naked eye. Chapter 775. The battle taking place on the 5th Street had attracted the attention of many residents in the northern part of the city. All of the powerful beings in Rodu were also looking toward the northern part of the city, but not many of them went to spectate the battle. A battle between 10th-tier powerful beings was very entertaining to watch, but not everyone could be alive to watch it. The military and city defense forces had also received orders not to attack. The torrential downpour continued to wash over the streets of Rodu, and everyone was trying to guess who would dare to cause such a huge commotion in Rodu. There were also people who thought back to that rainy night 3 years ago, which had also taken place on the 5th Street in the northern part of the city, but the commotion on that night was even louder than that of today. On that night, the battle god of the Roth Empire, Alex, had been killed, and a legend of a generation had fallen. Someone important had definitely died on that night, but no one knew who it would be this time. The normal citizens only thought that it was just a few claps of thunder on a rainy night, and they rolled over before falling asleep again. However, many people were unable to sleep, wondering what would happen after that night. In the second prince's manor, in the small kitchen, Amy sat by the window and scooped up a spoonful of ice cream cake with a small spoon. The pink ice cream and the creamy yellow mousse cake had very distinct layers, and the sweet aroma of the cake immediately wafted through the air. When combined with the faint aroma of strawberries, Amy's eyes immediately lit up. She opened her mouth and placed the cake into her mouth. The smooth ice cream melted in her mouth, fusing as one with the soft and fragrant cake. The wonderful taste made Amy's eyebrows curl into crescents, and her little face lit up with bliss. After swallowing the cake, she nodded and said, "Father, this ice cream cake is so delicious." Meg, who had been conjured by magic, stood off to the side and looked at her with a smile. "Looks like Master Meg made delicious food for his daughter again. What an enviable pair of mother and daughter. I wonder why His Highness instructed me to come and see them." Under the eaves not far away, the housekeeper stood on her tiptoes and looked in the direction of the small kitchen. From her position, she could see Amy and Meg in the kitchen through the half-open window. She scratched her head in confusion and hid under the eaves again. Under the heavy rain, the temperature dropped even lower. Wearing only a thin gown, he shivered and stood on his tiptoes to take a look. He muttered, "They're eating delicious food in the warm kitchen. There's no need for me to stand guard here. I'll report to His Highness when he returns." After saying that, he shrunk his head and walked along the corridor. "What will Father do? If you leave in such a hurry, will you encounter bad people?" Amy glanced in the direction where the manager had been standing. She looked at the pouring rain outside the window and thought to herself worriedly, "But the ice cream is about to melt. What a pity. Let's eat it then." Amy looked at the ice cream cake in front of her, nodded seriously, and picked up the spoon again. All of the dead fish eyes in the sky were glowing with a faint green light, as if they were a school of sharks that had smelled blood. They flew toward the griffin in a frenzy, and even the raindrops were unable to fall. The spatial demon patriarch also had a crazed look on his face. He spread open his arms, and 2 round plates appeared in his hands. He slowly brought them together toward the griffin down below as he yelled, "Spatial millstone. Obliterate all things." The space directly below the eye beast began to twist and warp as if it were being forcibly compressed by something. Countless spatial rifts appeared in an area of several dozen meters, some of which were even several meters in length. They were like a series of sharp swords that were suspended in mid-air. The green eyeballs fell into the inky black spatial rifts, and they immediately exploded into green liquid before instantly disappearing into the spatial turbulence. This space was like a compressed crystal, and countless cracks had appeared on its surface, as if it were going to shatter at any moment. At the center of this crystal, Meg's expression was still as calm as ever as he stood atop the griffin's back. His heavy sword was held horizontally before him, and he seemed to be ready to strike at any moment. Irina's arms were wrapped around Meg's waist, and she was also completely unconcerned. As long as she could lean against him, there seemed to be no danger at all as he was always able to resolve all problems perfectly. The purple-striped griffin with a wingspan of over 10 meters nimbly traversed through the cracks in space. The tiny cracks left scratches on its body, and blood gushed out from the wounds. However, the griffin did not slow down its speed in the slightest. There was no fear in its resolute gaze, only fearlessness. Green eyeballs had already surged forth, and they were so densely packed that it seemed as if they were trying to squeeze the griffin. The sound of space being torn apart made one's teeth itch. Densely packed spatial cracks filled the entire space, and it was as if 2 invisible hands were slowly closing in on each other. It was already on the verge of collapse. The group of black-robed men on the 5th Street looked on with awe and horror in their eyes. Regardless of whether it was the massive eye beast or the spatial rifts, they were both terrifying and unstoppable in their eyes. Meanwhile, the griffin was like a moth flying toward a flame, looking extremely frail and feeble, as if it could be swatted to death by the spatial turbulence at any moment. Their faces were filled with shock, and they could hardly believe what they had just seen. The terrifying eye beast and the spatial demon patriarch were almost invincible, but that man had vanquished them with a single sword strike. Invincible war god, one of the black-robed men swallowed his saliva and mumbled dryly. One by one, the legends about Alex began to emerge in their memories. The legend who could slay dragons in the sky was known as the strongest knight. 3 years ago, he was rumored to have died. And in these 3 years, they had been constantly searching for him, wanting to kill him so that they could succeed. Only now did they realize how naive they had been. Alex, who had been rumored to be completely powerless, had reappeared. He had slain 3 10th-tier powerful beings, slain the Eye Beast, and severely wounded the spatial demon patriarch. A legend had reappeared. You're still the boss after all. From this day forth, all of the organizations searching for Alex would most likely disappear. Who in this world dared to claim that they could kill Alex at his peak? No one. Above the rain of blood, the man sitting on the back of the griffin was the embodiment of invincibility. It's time to go. On the griffin's back, Meg heaved an internal sigh of relief. It was a pity that he hadn't been able to kill the midget, but at the very least, he had saved Irina. The most important thing now was to find a way to make a perfect exit. A faint green magic barrier kept the rain at bay, and wisps of green light flowed toward Irina's body from within the magic barrier. In the distant sky, a green light was still flowing into the magic barrier like an antenna. Her pale features gradually began to recover, but she had no intention of letting go of Meg's waist. There's a cat over there. Meg was just about to ask Azzy to take him away from here when Irina suddenly pointed down at the rubble below. There was a large leaf there that was glowing with a green light, like a huge umbrella, holding up the sky above the rubble. A black cat was trembling as it hid beneath the leaf, meowing softly. A dozen black-robed men on unicorns were waiting at the 5 streets, and 2 black dots in the distance were galloping in their direction. Meg hesitated for a moment, then turned the griffin's direction and swooped down. Disperse. The black-robed men's faces were filled with fear. They had just witnessed Meg's terrifying strength when he killed the giant beast with a single strike. Now that he was rushing toward them, they couldn't summon any will to resist. They pulled their unicorns and wanted to retreat. Several magic barriers instantly erupted from the magicians' bodies. Even though they knew it was useless, they still hoped that they could hold on for a while longer. Despair instantly spread among the black-robed men. Many of them were already regretting why they dared to stand in front of Alex, and even wanted to find him and kill him. Before the patriarch passed away, he sent us a message stating that he encountered Alex in Rodu and was severely wounded. However, he's already left Rodu and is on his way back to our race. He died on the way back, and we still don't know who killed him. The hall suddenly quieted down. All the demons looked at the black piece of metal in the demon's hand with fear in their eyes. Alex is not dead. This news was as confusing as Benson's death. The patriarch is dead, but Alex is still alive. Will he take revenge on the Void Tribe? After a long silence, a demon asked fearfully. As soon as he said that, many demons showed concern on their faces. Even the spatial dimension patriarch had been severely injured or even killed by him, so how could they possibly be a match for him? The patriarch is dead. The third elder's lamp has been snuffed out. Similar events were taking place in many demon, orc, and forest troll tribes on that night, and emotions of grief and horror were spreading like wildfire. This made many people think back to that night 3 years ago, when countless tribes and races had lost their pillars of support, all because of Alex. On this occasion, no one knew what had happened in Rodu, and who had killed all of those 10th-tier powerful beings before more information was sent back to Rodu. On the central island of the Demon Islands, there was an inky black hall. On the top of the hall, 2 black figures stood 2 meters apart from each other. One of them was thin, while the other was fat, and both of them were looking toward Rodu. "Benson is dead." The fat demon broke the silence. "I didn't think that Alex would still be alive," the skinny demon said in a deep voice, with a hint of anger in his voice. The fat demon clenched his fists with rage, and said, 3 years ago, our demon race sacrificed 4 10th-tier warriors in order to kill him. This time, 2 more 10th-tier warriors died in order to kill Irina, and even Benson was killed. We've lost almost a third of our demon race's powerful beings, but we didn't get anything out of it. Instead, we've been severely wounded. The thin demon quickly calmed down, and said, our 3 races have lost so many powerful beings in quick succession, yet the human race hasn't paid any price at all. Do you think it's possible that Josh and Alex were putting on a show 3 years ago to kill all of the 10th-tier powerful beings sent by our 3 races, and then spread the news that Alex is dead? Furthermore, the human race already has more 10th-tier powerful beings than any of our 3 races. If he formed an alliance with the elves and dwarfs, our 3 races may not be able to defeat them. Cunning humans. The fat demon gritted his teeth as he looked at the thin demon, and said, then what should we do now? Andre is an old fox. Over the past few decades, the human race has become more and more powerful under his leadership.